Hi, Tina. Hi, Lindsay. Hey, Bennett. That's my buddy.
I'm going to have to ask, is this a woman's only meeting?
No, no way, Jose. I can hear you now. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry, it's
You
my
look
fault.
pretty today.
Thank you. I tried, although my lighting here sucks and I don't have any extra lighting. I was like scouring for a lamp or something. Um, and I got you a joiner. It's so funny. I got I got a workplace chat from an agent. I believe her name is Tanya. I think she's on here right now. Um, Mickey McDougal out of Midland told her to contact me about Farm and Ranch. And I said, oh, well, we're going to have a little basic conversation. Come join
Right.
the little realtor revolution that my friend is having. So
Well, awesome. Hey,
you're
Tanya,
killing me.
you're on
What's
mute and
happening?
we
What's
totally
happening?
can't hear you.
Look at her with her knife. What are you doing? Tanya, you're on mute. I really want to know what's going on right
I
now.
I am actually getting dinner ready. I'm making black buck green chili tacos tonight. So I'm trying to get everything prepped and in the crock pot for dinner so I don't have to worry about it.
That is hilarious. Well, we're so glad that you were able to connect with me via Mickey. And like I said, it was very impromptu when you sent that message. I was like, well, we're about to be online here shortly. So definitely wanted to share kind of the basic information.
I've been
So
wanting to get into farm and ranch for a while. We own a ranch in Brady and we'll be moving that direction. So I kind of want to transition from the whole the whole residential to farm and ranch.
All right. Well, I guess we're almost at 10 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get started. Miss Lindsey Hollin is with us today to share all things farm and ranch. Lindsey has been a great resource for me as I've got my real estate career rolling. And I've just been so grateful for her. So she's here today to tell us all the things and and to share her expertise. So, Lindsey, take it away.
awesome. Well, welcome. I'm very excited to be a part of this awesome group of ladies doing this realtor revolution. Bear with me. I was actually putting some notes together so I could share my screen because there is a lot that goes into farm and ranch. I always start with the agent and or the broker, whichever you may be, or your broker associate, that you're running your own business, right? And you get into this business and it's very basic knowledge on mostly residential real estate. And then you realize there's a whole world out there to be able to just expand your practices based on your passions. And you know, even Stephanie can tell you she's realized that her passions have switched from just doing the standard residential to working in a rural market to now that she wants to focus hardcore on investors. And so when you're in this journey of running your own real estate business, you find out what you're most passionate about, as well as where your future may lie as far as expanding. Are you going to run a big team? Are you going to be a team lead and things of that nature? So I know here we have several different walks of life and individuals in their journey. Just real quick, who has been in the business 10 years or longer? Is there anybody on this chat that has been in you can drop it in the chat. Oh, Tina just is waving. Awesome. Tina, how long have you been in the business? Would you mind chiming in for us?
No problem. I've been in business since 2005.
Awesome. Awesome. So you know your way around the block and you have been in the ups and downs from the 2008 shift, as well as some of the shifts we've had here recently. That is very
Yes.
exciting. So, as you probably know, dealing with some of the ins and outs and also the changes in not only the Texas Real Estate Commission, but also now with the new NAR adjustments that they're having to make. There is a lot you have to just consider when you talk about what your next steps are and the positions you're taking. So, I was very excited when Stephanie asked me to chime in on farm and ranch real estate. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my path, how I got here, and then how I really chimed in on making sure this was a job that I was considering as a part of my real estate business moving forward. So we're going to dive right into that. For those of you that don't know me, I know I have some really amazing friends here that I've known for a while that have known my story. I'm actually from the swamps of South Florida. My father is actually famous for surveying the Everglades. So I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and all I knew was land. That was me, land and wildlife. I had the opportunity, and I'm not going to elaborate. I had the opportunity to be a competitive shotgun shooter in college, and then went on to train for the Olympics, which brought me to Texas. Guns and Jesus. We love Texas for that. I fell in love with the Texas Hill Country, and I settled in that Kerrville, Fredericksburg area. And so for me, finding a job that fed my passion as well as my pocketbook, because it is a little pricey in the hill country market to live and have fun. And also shooting was an expensive sport. I ended up meeting my first mentor, who owned a brokerage, and she had me open her farm and ranch brokerage for her in 2015. And it was a really amazing experience because it was not, real estate was not a path I thought about. I'd been in sales my whole life. And for those that have done sales prior to real estate is a different type of sales monster. It's very heavy marketing, customer service with salesmanship. So you're kind of the CEO, the COO, and the vice president of marketing all in one bat. And then you have this specialty, which has its own wild intricacies. So I was really excited that I had that support, especially from a very strong female. Was able to open her office and develop it, and shortly after, I was poached by the much larger farm and ranch conglomerates. If you go out and Google or Chat GPT, farm and ranch real estate brokers, there is a laundry list of organizations that is just what they do every day. And I was very thankful to learn that. It's a dog eat dog world, and sometimes you're wearing milk bone underwear. But I was able to really get a deep dive into understanding the land on so many levels. I also got to understand really the differences within the real estate model and real estate agents and brokers that most agents don't see from day to day, because they live in the box of residential. I'm a realtor and this is what I do. Most people do not know that majority of farm and ranch full-time agents are not realtors. I'm actually not a realtor. I do not belong to a National Association of Realtors, and I haven't for a very long time, because what we are selling doesn't fit the same mold and qualifications. And also, for those who haven't read it in a while, if you read your clear cooperation regulations and laws within the realtor guidelines, it doesn't fit the client's needs, because you are not selling a home. Not everything, we're in the world of the internet. And a lot of you that have been in this business for a long time, remember, we didn't have the internet. Listings weren't public. You had to go to an agent or an office and have a private conversation. And a lot of those larger properties are very private for security reasons and other, obviously between the people and the animals and the world we live in right now, there is just some things you cannot put out into public. Also, the clients don't want a digital footprint of all the things that they have online. We do live in the world where we have to be careful. And even in residential, people casing a joint, or, during COVID, we had people taking tours that were not valid clients, and just wanted to get out there. So, really learning the difference between agent brokerage, and then your Realtor, National Association of Realtor obligations, and even down to your local board obligations. And I've had some conversations with agents. They're like, hey, Lindsey, how do I do this? And it's like, well, you need to find out what your board will let you do, because every board is different. And marketing is such a huge part of that. So starting with the basics, when I talk about farm and ranch real estate, is you have to understand first your licensing guidelines. And TREC is a huge one. There is a lot of TREC rules that are kind of as clear as mud. But in short, it says, if you've never done this before, and if your broker has never done this type of real estate transaction before, you have to have a mentor or someone in the mix. Someone has to carry that liability. You have a fiduciary responsibility for that client. And also what agents don't realize is that you have 4 years for anybody in the transaction to sue anybody in the transaction. And you thought a few years ago there was buyer's remorse because of pricing. Just imagine if you have this big, beautiful ranch and you're on it for 4 years and anything can happen. And we've seen it, guys. It's real easy for, in most cases, the buyer to sue the seller. And that's 4 years. I mean, so I tell my agents and people that ask me, I'm like, you're putting your livelihood, your family, your license. When you take a deal, no matter what the deal is, you're putting everything you own on the line. And if you admittedly take on a deal wholeheartedly without making sure that you have that, what TREC calls competency, and mind you, that competency is so wide in farm and ranch, so I tell agents, I know it sounds exciting and I know it sounds fun, but if you've never done it before, even if your family owns a ranch, if you've never done it before, then you are a perfect target in a legal battle, because that's going to come up. And unfortunately, I have been involved in 3 legal battles with real estate, and I have literally watched the person who I thought was in the wrong, because of better legal advice and a better legal team and a better attorney, they were able to win. And I tell agents, what you think is right and wrong doesn't matter once you sit in that courtroom, because it's a whole different ball game. So I always urge agents, when we start, you have to go back to the basics. You want to sell farm and ranch real estate, that's awesome. It starts with you, and it starts with education. So get yourself in one of the amazing farm and ranch classes that are out there. I'm assuming that most of us are from the state of Texas. Number one guru of farm and ranch real estate teaching is going to be Charles Porter. Charles Porter I always joke with people. I said, you better hope the only time you see Charles Porter is in your real estate class, because Charles Porter is the expert witness for TREC. So when you get in trouble, or someone gets in trouble in real estate and in farm and ranch, not just, he does regular real estate too, but he's the one in the courtroom saying if you're wrong or not, basically. So you don't want to see Charles Porter unless you are in his classroom. He's been doing it for over 40 years. He is a gem. I actually just did an amazing podcast with him, and I was going to drop that link. I was going to drop the link in the chat, but you can also go to my YouTube channel. It's Land by Lindsey. It is super simple to watch. What I do is I interview people within the realm of farm and ranch real estate. And it is a podcast for landowners and agents that want to learn more about land ownership. And obviously being a great salesman, you put yourself in your client's shoes. If I was a buyer and I was a seller, what questions would I have and what would I ask? But I would highly recommend you start with education. And Charles Porter's number one. I teach a few classes, and I'm diving into that. And then if you look in the photos of everyone. There's a beautiful lady with a bridge over her head. Stacy Bray is here with us. She also teaches farm and ranch and rural classes. She actually has an amazing watershed as well as a septic class that I've actually had a chance to review with her. So there's quite a handful of educational realms. Also, organizations. So just like you have your board, you guys have your Realtor Revolution and all your networks, we have farm and ranch networks. So the number one I would highly recommend, because they also couple a lot of education, is the Texas Alliance of Land Brokers. Their membership, I will tell you, I joke with them all the time. I'm like, please raise your prices. You're like, you're too cheap, but it's super affordable to be a member. They have pretty much 2 meetings a month in 2 different parts of the state. Great people, because also in farm and ranch and like commercial, your network is everything. If you list a property and no one in the world of farm and ranch knows you, they're going to be very hesitant to show your property to their client because they don't know your competency. The other reason I'm heavy on education is because your CE history is public knowledge. So if you go put a ranch out there for sale and we pull your information up, hey, I don't know this girl, or this guy, and we see that you have done nothing in the past, that is going to raise a red flag for the other client, whether it's a buyer or seller, because the other agent also doesn't want to get themselves into a legal bind, because now it is known that there is a high question of competency. So I tell agents, do not wait until you get a deal or you have a client to start, if this is something you're serious about, because it'll come out in court that you did not have 100% competency. And you know, it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. Like, I had no idea, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, listen, when it comes down to millions of dollars at stake and people in a courtroom, the real estate agent is the easiest target. They can pick us apart because we're not attorneys. And we're basically negotiating legal forms like that. Those promulgated forms are the only thing, in our experience, is the only thing we have. So I urge everybody, education is key. A lot of agents do forget that there is a history online publicly to everyone what we have studied. So if you do want to get into this realm, get those classes in first, because it could come back to bite you if you do not have proof of competency, and a part of that competency is going to be your education, and the education is out there. The other organization, and I'm sorry to get off topic, the other organization is going to be Land Broker MLS and Land Broker Co-op. So Land Broker Co-op is a co-op of agents that own Land Broker MLS. And so we have our own multiple listing service. Now, not to confuse with the residential board MLS, which is NAR affiliated. Land Broker and MLS is not NAR affiliated. So they do not follow the same guidelines. And it's all, that's education. And I will tell you, after the NAR settlement, it's very important that you understand, because farm and ranch real estate and commercial were not named, real estate was not named in that settlement. So what you do for residential, what your brokers have told you that you have to do for the settlement, is not the same for commercial and farm and ranch. So it's very important that if you are going to enter into that market, that you do have the coaching and the mentorship to help you navigate that different funnel of real estate. Because now more than ever, people are putting deals under a microscope. And so that is also very important. I think I pretty much covered, you know, there are statutes and rules that your license can be suspended or revoked if you don't have competency. So definitely start with the education and find yourself a farm and ranch mentor. And
Hey,
then, yes,
on
ma'am.
that note, I know it's just having the broker experience that you have. What are the 3 like what are the 3 mistakes that you have seen agents make when maybe they didn't have the training or the mentorship that they needed? In your experience as a broker, what are the top 3 mistakes that you've seen made?
The number one mistake is you don't know what you don't know. So there is a separate buyer and seller process. And sometimes I actually had 2 agents call me almost identical stories. They're like, oh, it was raw land. I just put it on the MLS. And I'm like, okay, did you map out the property? What did the client say about the survey? What is the highest and best use? You know, when I go to, for example, a listing, I have a 10-page interview and consultation with the client because there are so many moving parts, and that decides how we go to market. If you don't know the questions to ask, you've already set yourself up for failure and possibly legal ramifications. So thinking that because there's no structures on it, that it's super easy. That is one of the most common. And that's the part that's a big one that happens more often than not, because it's like out of sight, out of mind. There's no building there. This should be simple. It's just grass. It's just dirt, you know? And that's really scary. Also with that falls into your fiduciary responsibility of the client, because you didn't know that information. You now have put your client in a situation, to get in trouble and to be sued. So that's number one, thinking that blanket raw land is simple. You can just slap it in the listing service and put it online and call it a day. The second one is the fiduciary responsibility to the client, in the aspect of you're really close to the client and you're like, no one can work with this client but me. This is my client. Yes, you have special clients, but what you need to know is that when you cross over, whether they're your client buying commercial or your client buying farm and ranch, you have to hire with them a specialist. And if you go in with the mindset of, this is my client, I have a fiduciary responsibility to get them the best representation possible. And more often than not, what other agents don't understand is when you go to a level of farm and ranch and commercial, those agents completely understand it. They don't want your client. They want to help your client get the best deal possible, and you take your client back when we're finished. And that whole scaredness of losing a deal puts your business, and like I said, I remind people, it's your business. Your business is connected to your house and your kids and your life. You know, being sued for the next 4 years and then it being drug out in litigation for another 3. You know, if you start thinking about what you're putting at risk because you don't want to lose a friend or a client, if they're really your friend or client, they're going to respect the fact that you said, hey, listen, what you want is very complicated and there's possible legal ramifications and there's a lot of deep dive into this. So we need to hire an expert. And the thing is that you go in, you interview the person, you know that they're not going to poach your client for future deals. You know, I do not sell residential. It is not, I refer residential out. Like, I have my expertise. So really the second, you know, biggest mistake an agent makes is they get so emotionally involved, they forget that bigger picture of liability because they're so nervous about losing a client. And actually it's not, you're actually going to keep that client because they're going to be like, man, thank you so much for getting a team together to help me achieve this particular real estate goal. The third one, when you've realized that you got into something you shouldn't have, hiring a consultant, paying to play. So many agents don't want to pay. You know, I know a lot of us, at least in this time, are kind of scrapping, but I have agents that get into a deal and they're into the contract phase and they don't know how to write the contract. And I'm like, that should scare the crap out of you. If you are to a point where you don't know how to write the contract and your broker doesn't know how to write the contract. Now, mind you, your broker is the one that's responsible for you. They carry your errors and omissions insurance. That's something else agents need to be aware of. If you get sued, what happens next? Who's footing the bill? What does errors and omissions cover? What some people don't realize, I'm going to take a sidebar. What some people don't realize is that some brokers do not carry a high level of errors and omissions insurance. So if this deal is over so many millions of dollars, you may not be covered. So
And
it's
you may need a second policy.
yeah,
to
you may
cover
need a second policy. And that is something that majority of agents don't know. They just feel like, hey, my broker's got this. I promise you, I've seen it even within our own brokerage where deals have gotten to higher than a certain number or complex. I'm like, hey guys, if we're going to go to closing, y'all might want to foot a little bit more out of this bill to cover you, because no one knows what's going to happen the next 4 years. So getting off that sidebar of errors and omissions insurance, you either have 100% of the competency to do a deal or you don't. And your errors and omissions insurance covers you. So if you're at a point to where you are in a bad spot, fix it. And also you have to pay to play. I'm not going to take and just give out advice and opinions and have my errors and omissions insurance cover me if you get sued 4 years down the road. You have to know that commission is connected to competency. So if you don't have it, you don't get paid. And someone's got to carry it. So if you are in that boat, you have to pay the person who's carrying the liability. And it's almost insulting when people say, oh, well, aren't you a part of our team or you're in our brokerage? And I'm like, listen, I didn't spend the past 10 years with a 50-50 split getting my butt chewed by major brokers to learn this business to give you that advice for free. And then if you do something, and I don't know what you've done, that's the other thing. I don't know what you've done to start to finish. If you don't know how to write a contract, you pretty much probably didn't know the questions to ask from the beginning to get you to this point. So the last and major thing is when you realize that you need help not getting it, or not willing, worrying about the money. And what is that? What is the number one code of real estate is we have a fiduciary responsibility to our clients. And once you put the money in front of that, you have now admitted that your clients are not number one. And it's real easy in these times where we're struggling to forget that times that commission check price by 5, and that's what you're gonna owe when you get sued. So I don't mean to scare individuals, but I'm like, if you are going to do this and play with the big boys and get the big checks, there's a lot of big learning and there's a lot of big responsibility for these clients. And it seems like common sense, but common sense is not too common. I hope that answers your questions. I know there's more, but those are my big 3.
Nice. What do and I think a lot of people, especially with residential, forget that a lot of times in farm and ranch, I mean, if you're selling something in the hill country, oak wilt disclosure. Lindsey and I were talking about the anthrax triangle last week. There are a lot of people that have no idea what that is. If you're selling a ranch in the anthrax triangle, you need to disclose that to a buyer if you're the listing agent. And that's a conversation that Lindsey and I have had a lot about, because a lot of people have no idea what anthrax is, other than, I think there were envelopes that got sent to the White House years ago. And that's like how people kind of think whenever they hear anthrax, if they don't know wildlife. That's something that they hear about, and they don't have no idea what you're talking about. It sounds really scary. So
Yes,
Oak wilt is a little more common. Like I feel like most people know what we're talking about there.
it's common now. It's common now. I do remember when it wasn't common and there was lawsuits over it as
Yeah.
far as, oh, I bought this property because it had beautiful oak trees. Now the oak trees died. Picking up on what Stephanie's talking about, there's a lot of hazards in selling farm and ranch real estate. And as a real estate agent, you have to advise the client to disclose those hazards, or you have to advise the client on what hazards you know as an agent who's competent in that area. Because I will tell you, folks, sellers and sellers agents don't always know what hazards are on the property. This happened with a group out of San Angelo. They called me immediately. It was a positive. It was a positive result of number 3, getting into the deal and writing the contract and realizing that this is going to take more. They hired me. I started from the beginning. It was crazy. We're on the phone. They're trying to write the offer. And I'm like, hey, I got to start with the property. Give me the property address. So I immediately mapped out the property on our mapping system and found out there were 3 easements on the property. And I asked her, I said, hey, so I see that there's 1 power line easement and 2 oil and gas easements. And she's like, well, nobody told us that there were easements on the property. I said, well, so glad that you brought me along. I said, let's pull them up, and I'm showing her my screen. And obviously you saw the power line overhead, but underneath that power line, there was 2 separate oil and gas easements. It showed that they were active and who was in charge of those easements, what oil and gas companies. So I said, listen, let's write the offer. Let's offer a decent amount of due diligence, an option period, or we call, the option period is the most common for agents to recognize. And it's where you do your due diligence. And I said, let's write the offer. We can refer the clients to the attorneys, which I have an attorney on staff. And let's make sure that they are comfortable and aware of all of the information that has to do with this easement, because this easement means that these 3 different companies, these 3 different easements have people that can walk in and out of the property. And we don't know what those guidelines are. We don't, could they put more easements on there? There's so many questions. I said, so your clients want the property, let's lock it down in a contract, but let's protect the clients and get them the information so they are extremely sure that they still want this property with these easements and the guidelines that the easements have. And, she was dumbfounded. She goes, but the other agent didn't know. And I said, well, you represent the buyer. I said, when you represent the buyer, you have to have competency in this field. You're supposed to know this. And she was very grateful, and she did pay me. She did pay me to be a part of the transaction, which I appreciated, because I'm putting my butt on the line now for the next 4 years being a part of that transaction, even though I came in at the end. But just think if they closed that deal without knowing they had 2 oil and gas leases and some guy showed up to work on them. I mean, there's a lot of things, scary things that can happen on that. And that wasn't even a hazard. And that wasn't even a hazard at all. That was just knowing the property and knowing the survey. And I actually think that because the survey was a simple boundary survey, that's a whole nother discussion, the different types of surveys out there. A standard boundary survey is not going to have every marker on it. It's just going to have the boundaries. So knowing about your surveys, that's a whole nother class.
That's a whole different deep dive.
Yeah, exactly. So, going back to hazards, the most common hazards in farm and ranch real estate are flood hazards, your wildlife and animal agricultural hazards. Anthrax is a big one. CWD is another one for deer and certain other type of wildlife. In the Central Hill Country, dipping vats are huge, and a lot of people don't know what to look for. Dipping vats were very popular in the 1900s. That's where you would dip the animals in chemicals to, you know, treat them and things like that. You know, some of these ranches that haven't been for, you hear these marketing, oh, never been to market in 120 years. Well, there's a lot of things that are hidden in 120 years
There's
on a
some
ranch.
extra things.
Yeah, there's some extra and then, you know, actually I'm working on a class on this, brownfields, dump sites. It wasn't uncommon, and it still isn't uncommon. If you have a family ranch, there's a hole in the ground where you just shove stuff
Somewhere.
in.
Right. And that's a
So,
conversation that Lindsay and I have had too. And I remember, you know, we were on the phone and you were like, you're one of the few agents that actually knows what that is. And it's like, because I've seen where there have been holes dug and everything that was on the ranch pushed in and buried. And just not, I mean, I think that as a residential agent, that's not even something you would think of.
or
That's
no,
not something that you would think about.
or know what to look for, because walking the land is number one. And when you walk the land, you look and you're trying to find these red flags for your client, because once they move in, they're going to find it all. And knowing what markers look like, you know, very subtle markers. And what's insane is I've seen sellers remove markers. And so knowing how to read the maps, knowing how to use mapping systems like Land ID. I'm a big fan of Land ID. They do a phenomenal job. It's very user-friendly. They're one of the land mapping systems, and it's not just a map. It's actually all land identification. So it uses all the layers that are available, you know, between looking at soil types to easements to potential hazards on the property. They're my go-to, but also being savvy in that, being able to pull it up and read it and translate it to your clients is very important. So the systems that we use, you know, most agents that do residential, you know, they're like, okay, I know how to use the MLS. I know how to do a CMA. You know, in my MLS, I know how to go to the county appraisal district, and that's kind of your limit. Well, our systems are a little more complicated than that, but also being an expertise of how to, you know, flag those before you go out and show is also very important, and just takes time and knowledge and having a mentor and going to the classes. And I always tell agents, you know, your CE courses, your classes you go to, that's in theory. Then you have to go and, you know how you had chemistry lab and then you put what you learned in your textbook and you actually made it happen. So you take in theory and then you put boots on the ground.
Yes. And Tina asked about what Land ID system do you use? She's talking about Land ID. And yes, Tanya, that used to be MapRight. I still call it MapRight.
I still call it
I don't
MapRight.
know that I'm ever going to not call it MapRight. And just so everybody knows, if you type in mapright.com, it still comes up to Land ID. So
and
that's how I get to it.
I am dear friends with the MapRight family, and if you're interested in checking MapRight out, they do offer some exclusive deals. So if you want to just reach out to me, please feel free to shoot me a text message. I'll get you with the powers that be and maybe get you a little discount on that as well. I know they also offer a free trial so you can practice it. So please feel free to reach out to me. I actually wanted to put I was going to put my information in the chat, as well as I did put, I'm going to do it real quick right now. So I'm going to put the YouTube streams so you can look up that Dr. Porter as well as other educational classes in the chat. And then I am going to take and put my contact information in there as well.
I think it would be really great too, Lindsay, if we could get the Land ID guys. Land ID does so many awesome things. I feel like a lot of times we're talking about, man, you know, I'm using this technology, but I'm not using it um to the maximum ability that it's capable of performing at. I think it would be
Absolutely.
really cool to get those guys kill it. I mean, when they're doing demos, like they can rock your socks really
They
fast just on the stuff that they can do. Guys, like they're way far ahead of me. But
they
they make some awesome stuff.
They definitely geek out on their
They
technology
do.
and they're very passionate about it, doing it a long time. I actually just had a one-on-one with them with some of their new rollouts because one of the best things I use Land ID for is for buyers. So we will take all the properties that we are considering looking at and we will map them out and do kind of an overview. And I've narrowed down, you know, if you're talking about gas money and a 1 to 2 hour drive between properties, you know, or you're going across counties, if there's any way to eliminate an absolute no just by sitting down at your computer for an hour, because let's face it, guys, how many times have you seen a listing and the photos are only of one point of view, and then if they would have turned around and showed the neighbor, you would have been hell no. Yeah, the other example I give is there was a beautiful property, but when we mapped it out, there was a massive power line right next to the property. And obviously, hey, let's face it, we've done it before. It's marketing. We don't want to put anything that's going to scare a client off. But I knew my clients didn't want to see aren't going to want to see a power line on, you know, one of their 4 views of the property. So we were able, just by doing a simple, you know, 5-minute map of that property and looking at it from an overview. Also too, you know, where it's located as far as, you know, roads. I think that's something that's huge. You know, you're getting a rural property, you're going to be out in the middle of nowhere. But how many crossings are you going to have to go over, especially in the hill country? You know, we are sometimes landlocked for a day or 2 or a week, depending on the amount of flooding we get. Also, what type of road is it? You know, and the neighbors is a big thing. Hey, how big are my neighbors? Who are my neighbors? What are my neighbors doing? You know, is how close is that rock quarry to my property? Just little things. So in Farm and Ranch, not just have I done it before, have I been to the classes, have I shadowed someone, I've walked the land, but also, okay, these systems, how can these systems help me define this property enough to where these clients can make a decision with as many of the facts as I can find as possible. So if something does happen, we can go back to, okay, we checked all these boxes. We disclosed all this information. You know, this shouldn't have happened, and how and why. And like I said, that evidence is the evidence you're passing on to the attorney to defend you and your client. So you know, I tell agents, I was like, listen, you know, you have to make sure your clients have a copy of everything and you have a copy of everything, because in 4 years, if something happens, you know that you checked all the boxes, whether it been for the buyer or for the seller. Also, going back to the story about, well, the seller didn't tell the seller's agent there was an easement. The seller's agent didn't list an easement. Well, guess what? If you were competent in the field, you would have saw that. So being able to identify that, because, you know, in court, they're gonna be like, hey, you two, neither of you agents should have been doing this deal. So you're both at fault. You know, and I've had another agent who sells ranches, and he said, hey, they didn't give us a disclosure for anthrax. And I'm like, well, you know, it's there. You have a ranch in that county yourself. You are responsible for telling your client, you know,
and
just
I think
because
a lot of people forget that just because the seller's agent didn't disclose it, if you have a buddy that wants to go and buy a ranch, you are just as responsible as the buyer's agent.
absolutely.
It doesn't make you less responsible.
Yeah, you
because
know,
you're
and,
not the listing agent.
well, it's a competency thing. You're competent for your client. So and I told them, I was like, hey, I was like, we're doing this deal. You need to make sure on file that even if you say your buddy knows, you have to have it on file that in the deal, your client was notified. And actually, Tina, thank you so much for bringing that up, because we're talking about things that aren't going to be on a residential house disclosure, right?
Right.
And some of these places do not qualify for you to use a residential house disclosure. So we have to use one. TREC says you use the documents that you're given. So depending on the type of hazard or item you're disclosing. So there are disclosures for floods. There are disclosures for environmental. So this is another thing that I've been reminding agents. Sometimes when we think environmental, we think like barrels of toxic waste, like sitting in a parking lot. Hazardous material can be anthrax, can be CWD. So there is actually a hazardous form that you can use that I actually urge agents to use, because it kind of gives you an additional option period if you wanted to do that. The other thing is you can do an exhibit. You can talk to your first thing. Oh, the other thing is always go back to the basics. Who's the person that tells you what you can and can't do? Your broker, right? So first things first, you need to ask your broker how they would like you to disclose this information. Because I know how I would do it, and a lot of brokers may not agree with that. Like, some people don't like you writing in special provisions. Some people don't like you writing in Exhibit A. I'm a huge exhibit fan. However, I have an attorney on staff, and they can approve, and I am a broker. I carry my own errors and omissions insurance, and then I'm also at EXP Commercial, and EXP Commercial carries an additional amount of errors and omissions insurance. So getting the approval one from your broker on how they want to disclose it, because there are ways to do it. And some brokers want it heavily disclosed in a special form or in addition to. Some brokers might say that you can, as long as you get an email from a client or a copy of the email, you can file that email as well as you can write it in special provisions. There are several different ways to disclose, but that falls under your broker's opinion. Most of the time, first things first, TREC states there's a form for it, we need to use it. So there are a few forms for hazards, particularly flood hazards. The other is the new section of the Farm and Ranch contract gives you a little bit of a space for a few items. And if there's not a place that's super obvious or you're concerned, go to your broker, because you'll probably have to write up an exhibit to the contract and have both parties sign, so it's acknowledged that both of them are aware. I know for a while, some of the local realtor boards had oak wilt disclosures, but those disclosures were written. Most of those disclosures were written by a licensed attorney and were approved by your broker, because your broker is a part of that board. So it's always important that you go back and make sure that that disclosure is a part of the deal of the contract in some way, shape, or form, based on what I know as a broker. We have an actual anthrax outline that we pulled from the CDC that goes to the CDC website. It explains anthrax in agriculture. The other thing is an emission. That was something that's big on the oak wilt disclosures. We're not admitting that there is oak wilt or 6 trees on this property. However, we want to make you aware that we're one in the 60, 70 counties of the state of Texas that could have it at any time. So that's the other thing. You're disclosing that you're in a zone, or do you have it, or have you had it? So that's something, that we have talked about. Stephanie and I talked about, because the client that she's representing, a few years ago when that anthrax came through, it did affect this ranch. So knowing how to disclose factually what had happened based on their knowledge or based on an expert's knowledge, because you may have to get a specialist in there. I know for Oakville, we use an arborist. And at this point and price point, if your clients can't afford something that may cost them millions of dollars, then they probably aren't going to be able to afford a ranch, because a ranch is expensive. Like it's not just the upfront cost, it's yearly maintenance, it's animals, it's taxes, it's employees that are managing your ranch. So I always tell agents, like, if people shy away from, oh, I don't want to hire an attorney, oh, I don't want to get a specialist, and I'm like, this is a part of land ownership, they're probably not qualified, which goes back to the 10-page interview that we have with our clients to make sure that this is feasible before you waste all this time and energy. Because a lot of people see the big reward, the big commission, they don't see the big effort.
The work.
That they don't see the work,
Yeah.
they don't see the failures, they don't see the losses, and they don't see the you know, all behind the curtain of Oz that's there. So first things first, it depends on what you're disclosing. You always ask your broker how they want it disclosed. As an agent, I always document what the broker told me, because if something comes up in court, you can say, my supervising broker is XYZ. Here's the email where they stated, because you also have to protect yourself. You know, you are an agent of the broker, and always go back to that broker, because if it goes to court, I always remind agents, you got to remember how this business works. If it goes to court, your broker is going to have evidence that you never asked them. Well, I'm their supervising broker. They never had a question. They never came to me. They never sent me an email. Everything was okay. Well, then that falls on you. Well, hey, Miss Agent, this is your licensed supervisor. I see that, you know, this is the first few times you're doing a type of deal like this. You've never ran into a situation with this hazard before. You know, how did you know to disclose it? How did you know to do this? So you got to protect yourself, do your own due diligence as an agent with a license number with the state of Texas, and then putting it back on your supervisor if they're supervising you. So don't shy away of getting them involved, because once again, they have errors and emissions insurance. Well, her error was she didn't contact her broker, and then you become defending yourself because you didn't follow protocol, so to speak. So do not forget that your broker is responsible for you, and you have an obligation to keep them in the mix and to also protect yourself by documenting what they've told you to do based on their broker standards.
And I think it's really important to remember too that, especially it looks like everybody that's here, we're all in the same spot. We have a team. We have a team of brokers that you know, when you have something that's messy, you can go in and say, hey, I need help. And they're gonna, even if it's like, hang on, they have a whole group of brokers there that can collaborate and work it out. So don't ever feel like you can't take your messy to the broker room.
Absolutely.
We have walked
then,
right up in there with all kinds of messy and said, okay, what are we going to do about this today? And they gladly help.
Absolutely. And you also got to remember, your brokers only know what they know. So understanding how real estate works, you know, it's clearly states that you have to have competency and your broker has to have competency. You know, most brokers do not have farm and ranch experience. So you're going to, until you're an expert, you are required by the state to work with an expert or refer that liability, that fiduciary responsibility to someone that is. So I go back, if you're serious about this, you need to have classes before you take a deal. You need to prove that you wanted to do this prior to seeing the money. Because an attorney can blow you out of water in court of your competency. You know, it never really showed interest in this until you had this buddy. You know, so I always remind agents, it's really important. The more you know, the more you grow. And protecting your future is super important. It's fun. I will tell you, I love it. I love putting my snake boots on. I love getting in my truck. I love the sound of a gravel road and my tires. Like, that is my soul. That is my thing. And it doesn't seem like work, even though it's really hard work. However, I know when I look a client in the eye that I can protect them. And if we get in a situation, I have set up a team of partners and attorneys, because there's a whole nother the one thing we have a few minutes. The one thing we haven't touched on is the financial side of farm and ranch sales. Who's heard of a 1031 exchange? Like, raise your hand. Or yeah. Did you know that 1031 exchange was actually created for farm and ranchers? That's actually why the government created it. It was for farm and ranch real estate. And I actually have another podcast with our farm and ranch attorney, Greg Learman, and to listen to that. What's insane is that most of my clients don't realize that they qualify for one or they need one. The other aspect, and that's just selling. The other thing that happened, I'll give you a crazy story, because this was kind of an aha moment for me, because I understand 1031. Okay, where clients are going to sell something, buyer or seller. Hey, are you using a 1031, or do we need to talk about it? Like, how are you going to offset your capital gains tax? There's a whole nother deep dive, and you can watch the podcast with Greg of 1031 no longer has to be buying another ranch that looks exactly like the ranch you're selling. It can actually be, I don't even know what that is, the little thingy. It can actually be Amazon leases, oil and gas leases. There's a whole nother amazing ball game when it comes to 1031 exchanges. And that's why they're attorneys. They know what goes on. That's tax law. You're the source of the sources, but you need to be able to interview your clients and ask them fact-finding questions to find out how. I know we're going to sell this property and we're going to make money, but how much can I save them? And there's two scenarios. One I'm in right now. I have a client with a mixed-use property. It's got 2 homes. It's a little ranch, agricultural exempt. They want to take the property, and at first they told me they wanted to go buy another house in Rockport and downsize. Well, then it's 4 months later, we were talking, and they're like, yeah, we started looking for RV parks. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome. I was like, well, if you're gonna take this money to invest in an RV park, you guys need a 1031 exchange, right? And he's like, yeah, we have to, he's like, I don't know what it's called, but yeah, we need to do capital, defer taxes. And I said, well, you do know you have to do that. You have to declare in your sale that that's what you're doing. And you do know that you have to do that before closing, because once you close, you can't go backwards. You can't put that rabbit back in the hat. It doesn't work like that. Like, this is taxes. This is big money. This is capital gains. If you're going to defer your taxes, you have to have that set up, and then you have to declare when you close what you're buying and what you're rolling that money into. So just in conversation with the client I'm selling a property with right now, he completely 180s me. And I was like, listen, we have an attorney that does 1031 exchanges. Call him and talk to him, because when we get to a point in the market where we may sell quickly, and we need to have that done. And in his mind, he had no idea the timeline. And like I said, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax deferment, that if I wouldn't have listened and had my ears open, and I knew, because the client himself thought, oh, I can just wait to closing and do it. And it's like, no, you have to have that documented before you're closing. So that was one story that you don't have to know how 1031s are processed. You just need to know what they are and the gist of it. And then you ship them to the expert and let the expert tell them what the best route is. The other one that I had financially didn't have to do with 1031 exchanges. I was representing the seller. It was September. We got a offer on his ranch. Very excited. Getting the offer and negotiating accepted. Out of the blue, my client decides to talk to his CPA. He's like, yeah, I need to figure out what I'm doing with this money. The seller's CPA comes back and said, you can absolutely not close on this ranch this year. You have made too much money. You cannot accept this offer until January 1, which was September, October, November, December, which was in basically 3-4 months. The buyer was like, no, I want this property now. I get an offer to sell a property because the seller did not have a conversation with his CPA about his finances. Because you don't, we think, you know, here's the deal, here's the listing. But when you deal with clients that are selling big things, they have big portfolios. And I know it sounds crazy that you kind of have to say, hey, financially, did you have this conversation with your, did you have this conversation with your CPA? These are stories because of my past experiences. I'm able to protect myself time and money. And honestly, that was a big loser for me. I spent 2 years trying to sell that ranch and we lost an entire year because my client didn't talk to a CPA and I didn't have the foresight. You better believe a part of my listing interview is I need you to spend the next month having a conversation with your CPA to make sure, do you need a 1031 exchange? You know, have you made too much money? So before we even list, because if I would have known that, we would have waited 6 months to list the property. And it ended up costing me 2 years. And I ended up losing money on the deal because to carry a listing, especially in farm and ranch, it costs you money.
Yeah.
And this is a business and you have to look at your profit and loss sheet. Should I take this listing? Not just the legal side of it, but based on the obligations of a farm and ranch agent showing up at every showing and all the land MLSs it has to be on and all the potential magazines it needs to be in and all the marketing that it needs to have. Do I have what it takes to facilitate, you know, or should I refer it because I'm going to make more money referring versus the hours and the energy involved? So it's a very big picture, not one that I feel like we can entirely cover in an hour conversation.
Yeah.
I hope the basics and the high points are covered to understand this is serious business. We run a serious real estate business. You run an amazing real estate business that you are in charge of, and you are responsible to know the ins and outs of your licensing for your state, as well as the guidelines of your supervising broker. And if you start with that amazing foundation, you'll be able to make the decision on branching off into adding more divisions and little feathers in your cap, so to speak.
Lindsey, thank you so much for being with us today. Does anybody have any questions? Tina did ask how you spell Greg's last name. Is that the one out of out of DFW?
It's Greg Learman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's in DFW. What I'd tell you, Tina, you guys, if you just go to @LandByLindsey in YouTube, you will see his name and his contact information is actually in that video that we took. If you look at the description,
Okay.
that's probably the easiest way to learn all my partners is that I've talked about on this, you know, mastermind and more. And like I said, that is my open forum. So I would tell you, if you're serious about this, watch those podcasts because I cover contracts, I cover 1031 exchanges, I cover the different types of land loans. So really, you know, I put that information out there to help landowners and individuals interested in farm and ranch real estate. But Greg he's an amazing guy. He has the best bedside manner with our clients. His family owned a big ranch. So like he understands how to talk to that type of client because it is a different type of client. You know, they're boots, they're not suits. And sometimes when it comes to financial information, that does scare rural clients. So having somebody that knows how to talk to them, you know, like their family is really important.
Anya, make sure you send your info over to Lindsey so that she can get in touch with you. She's kind of she's kind of been our go-to on farm and ranch knowledge and questions. Again, Lindsey, thank you so much for being with us today. It's
Awesome.
always great. I know I talk to you all the time, but just being able to share this with everybody else is awesome. So thank you for carving out time for us today. Anybody else have any questions before we cut out? No, Harley says thank you so much. You guys next week. Paris, I think we have Kevin Kaufman next week. Y'all come back and see us next week. Next week we've got Kevin Kaufman from Next Level Agents Up. The guy is absolutely a genius. He's been incredible for my real estate career, a great mentor for me. And I no doubt everybody will totally enjoy him next week. So Lindsey, again, thank you so much for being with us this week, and y'all come back and see us next week.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye,
Thank you
y'all.
all.
Bye.
Have a good week.
I'll email over my information to you, Lindsey.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.